Hi, I'm Daniel Harper. When I needed life-saving heart surgery, my parents said they couldn't help because they'd already spent $100,000 on my brother's wedding. But they didn't actually. They'd also stolen my money to take out student loans for me. I nearly died. They raised toasts on the beach in San Diego, and now broke and abandoned, they came crawling back to me. But I had already made my choice. I was never the golden boy. Growing up in a two-story home on the south side of Portland, Oregon, our family looked picture-perfect from the outside. My dad, Gerald, worked in finance, my mom, Evelyn, taught English at a local high school, and then there were the Harper boys. Matthew, the firstborn, the prodigy, and me, Daniel, the afterthought. From as early as I can remember, Matthew's achievements were framed and placed all over the house. His soccer trophies lined the mantel. His report cards, straight A's, were pinned to the fridge like rare masterpieces. When I brought home a B+ in math, my mom glanced at it and said, "Try harder next time." Our living room saw more parties than any other space in the house, but not for birthdays or holidays. They were celebration events for Matthew's milestones. When he won the regional science fair, we had a barbecue. When he got his first internship with a tech startup, Mom made personalized cupcakes. I was the one taking coats, refilling chip bowls, making sure drinks stayed topped off. No one ever asked me how I was doing. One memory burns sharper than the rest. I was 16. Matthew had just been awarded a full-ride scholarship to Stanford. My parents threw a garden party in June, invited everyone from our street and half the staff from their workplaces. People clinked glasses of champagne. My father gave a toast calling Matthew the pride of the Harper family. My mom stood beside him, wiping tears of joy. Matthew grinned, basking in applause. I was off to the side, leaning against the kitchen doorway, holding a tray of deviled eggs. No one clapped for me that day. I remember locking eyes with my mom as I stood there. She smiled faintly and mouthed, "Be grateful." I lowered my eyes, nodded, and retreated into the kitchen. At school, I kept my head down. I joined the yearbook committee, volunteered at the community clinic, picked up a part-time job cleaning tables at a diner. My teachers liked me, but I never stood out. Not like Matthew. Not like the kid with a 5-year plan by sophomore year. My parents didn't hate me. They just didn't notice me. Not in the way they did him. It was as if there was only room for one star in the Harper family, and that slot had already been filled. By the time I turned 18, I had stopped hoping they'd see me differently. I applied to state schools without telling them. Got into University of Washington's Health Sciences program. When I told my dad, he nodded, said, "Good, a practical field." Then he went back to reading the paper. I knew then whatever future I was going to have, I'd have to build it alone. In those early college days, I remember sitting on the dorm bed watching the ceiling fan spin, wondering what it felt like to be wanted, not needed for a chore, not tolerated out of obligation, but truly wanted. The kind of affection that came naturally in our house was always reserved for Matthew. I once heard my mom on the phone with her sister bragging about Matthew's debate team win. When I walked in, she paused, lowered her voice, and asked me to give her a minute. I stood in the hallway listening as she called him gifted visionary destined for greatness. Not once did I hear her mention me. Even holidays had a rhythm that left me invisible. Christmas mornings, Matthew's gifts were wrapped in metallic gold paper stacked neatly with bows and name tags. Mine always 2 or 3 half the size, usually clothes I didn't ask for. One year I got socks and a used biology textbook. That same year, Matthew unwrapped a brand new gaming console. By my 2nd year of college, I stopped going home for breaks. I told them I was working or had volunteer shifts. The truth was I couldn't bear another meal listening to Matthew talk about his latest venture while my dad leaned in like he was hearing the secrets of the universe. I started spending holidays with classmates or staying on campus. It felt lonelier, yes, but at least it wasn't painful. And yet through all of that, I didn't hate them. Not truly. I think some part of me always hoped they'd wake up one day and see me. Not as Matthew's shadow, but as someone who tried, who worked quietly, who never asked for much but still deserved love. That hope would stick with me longer than I cared to admit. But back then at 18, I buried it under study guides and anatomy labs, telling myself that if I just kept moving, kept building something of my own, maybe someday I'd earn a kind of respect they couldn't ignore. The first few weeks at the University of Washington were overwhelming. I didn't know anyone, and I wasn't the kind of person who made fast friends. I stayed in a small dorm room that smelled like dust and instant noodles. My roommate dropped out 2 weeks in, and I didn't even notice until the RA came by to check. But there was a freedom in being invisible. I could wake up at 5, jog through the still sleeping streets of Seattle, and no one expected anything of me. No comparisons, no bar to measure myself against. Classes were tough. Anatomy, physiology, biochem, they demanded everything I had. But I threw myself into them because school was something I could control. I wasn't the smartest in the room, but I was the one who stayed the latest in the lab, who turned in every extra credit assignment, who said yes when professors asked for volunteers. To cover tuition and living costs, I picked up shifts as a transport tech at Rainier Community Hospital. I wheeled patients to x-rays, cleaned gurneys, changed linens. It was grunt work, but it put me in the orbit of medicine, and I soaked in everything. Nurses taught me how to read vital signs. One orderly showed me how to lift with my knees, not my back. Even the custodians gave me life advice: always carry a pen, don't eat the cafeteria chili. On the weekends, I worked security at student events. I didn't drink, didn't party. Instead, I pocketed the $20 an hour, watched drunk freshmen dance under strobe lights, and went home to study until I fell asleep at my desk. Every now and then, I'd check Matthew's social media. At MIT, he was thriving. Hackathons, networking events, photos with professors whose names I'd only seen on journal articles. For his 21st birthday, our parents flew out to Boston and threw him a party on a rooftop bar. I saw the pictures online: Gerald in a sport coat, Evelyn beaming, Matthew blowing out candles on a custom cake shaped like a circuit board. I didn't even get a text. I remember walking back to my apartment that night in the rain soaked through, gripping a plastic bag with a rotisserie chicken I'd bought on clearance. I sat on the edge of my bed, peeled the chicken with my fingers, and cried silently, the tears hot and humiliating. Still, I kept going. That was my way, forward always, one class, one shift, one day at a time. By junior year, things began to change. I got accepted into a clinical mentorship program. Dr. Jensen, a senior cardiologist, noticed my work ethic and took me under his wing. He let me shadow his rounds, asked my opinion during patient discussions, even invited me to sit in on research meetings. For the first time, I felt seen by someone I respected. One evening, after a 12-hour shift, Dr. Jensen patted my shoulder and said, "You've got something rare, Daniel. Not just the brains, but the heart. Don't lose that." I carried that compliment around like a secret treasure. My parents never visited, never asked how I was doing. But that year, I won the Community Health Impact Award. I helped launch a mobile clinic project for underserved neighborhoods. The mayor's office mentioned it in a press release. I emailed my mom the article. She replied 3 days later with a thumbs-up emoji. Graduation crept closer. I scraped together money for a decent suit, wrote a speech just in case. The ceremony was set in an old auditorium, the kind with squeaky folding seats and faded maroon carpet. I mailed out invites, one to our house in Portland, knowing full well what the answer would be. The morning of it rained, not a drizzle, a downpour. I remember checking my phone every 5 minutes. No new messages, no calls. I stood in the hallway in my cap and gown, heart thudding, scanning every person who walked through the doors. They didn't come. That night, I sat in my apartment eating leftover spaghetti. My diploma was in a cardboard tube beside me. I finally got a text around midnight. Sorry we couldn't make it. Matthew had a keynote in Zurich. Proud of you, son. I stared at the message until my screen dimmed. Then I turned off my phone and lay in the dark. The next morning, I didn't pack to go home. I accepted a job offer at Rainier Community as a full-time clinical assistant. I moved into a studio apartment 2 blocks from the hospital. It was tiny, but it had a balcony and a view of the freeway. And it was mine. All mine. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere, not because of my last name, not because of my brother's shadow, but because I had earned it. Things fell apart one ordinary Thursday. I was walking a patient back to their room when my vision blurred. The hallway lights stretched and warped like smears of wet paint. I remember the sound of monitors beeping, then the cold linoleum floor rushing up to meet me. When I woke up, I was lying in a hospital bed, my own hospital. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dr. Jensen stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, his face unreadable. Daniel, he said slowly, we ran some tests. Your mitral valve is severely damaged. You're going to need open heart surgery. I blinked, trying to process it. I was 26. I ran 3 miles every morning. I didn't smoke, didn't even drink coffee. How much is it? I asked, my voice hoarse. $85,000 minimum, and your insurance won't cover it all. I stared at the ceiling tiles. $85,000. I had maybe $4,000 in my savings. I'd just paid off my student loans. Over the next few days, I tried every avenue. The hospital had a financial aid department, but even with assistance, I was still looking at $50,000 out of pocket. My co-workers started a GoFundMe, and it helped. Some nurses chipped in generously, but it was a drop in the bucket. I called my parents. It was the first time I'd spoken to them in nearly a year. Mom answered on the second ring. Daniel, is everything okay? No. I told her everything. The collapse, the diagnosis, the surgery, the cost. There was silence, then a shaky exhale. Let me talk to your father. They called me back that evening. Daniel, my dad's voice was calm, clipped. We wish we could help, but the timing is difficult. Difficult. He sighed. Your brother's wedding is next month, in San Diego. It's costing more than we planned. I sat there in stunned silence. You're saying you can't help me because of Matthew's wedding? It's not just a wedding, Evelyn interjected gently. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event. We've already made commitments, deposits, vendors. I could feel my chest tightening. I'm your son. I might die without this surgery. You're strong, Daniel. You'll find a way. You always do. So that was it. $100,000 on flowers and centerpieces and ocean views, and not a cent for the son whose heart was failing. I hung up. They didn't call back. That weekend I saw pictures online. Matthew in a designer tuxedo, Evelyn in a silver gown. Gerald raising a glass beside an archway of orchids. The caption read, Harper Wedding Magic in San Diego. My inbox remained empty. The pain in my chest grew worse. I couldn't climb stairs without getting winded. I started sleeping on the couch because my bed felt too far away. One afternoon, Evelyn did call. Her voice was soft, like she'd been crying. We're so sorry, sweetheart. I wish things were different. Then make them different, I whispered. There was a pause. We can't undo what we've done. Just Be patient. Understand the position we're in. What position is that exactly, having to choose between a wedding and your son's life? I didn't mean that. Yes, you did. You meant every word. She went quiet. Then she said, "You've always been so independent. We assumed you'd manage." That was the last thing she said before the line went dead, and for the first time I stopped hoping they'd come through. I stopped waiting for the apology, the support, the love. They'd made their choice. And so I began planning how I'd make mine. I reached out to Rachel Lee the next morning. She was a social worker at the hospital, one of the few people who'd checked in on me beyond the basics. When she stepped into my room, clipboard in hand and worry in her eyes, I didn't hold back. "I need help. I can't do this alone." She nodded without hesitation. "Let's start with what resources we can tap into. There are foundations, emergency medical grants, even a few nonprofits that cover surgical costs." Rachel spent the next week rallying behind me. She reached out to the Hearts for Health Initiative, a nonprofit that funded critical procedures for underinsured patients. Dr. Miles, the cardiothoracic surgeon known for taking tough cases, agreed to review mine pro bono. He met me one evening with a warm handshake and eyes that didn't pity me, just saw me. "You've got a strong heart, Daniel. Let's get it fixed so it can keep fighting." Within 10 days, the paperwork went through. The foundation agreed to cover the bulk of the cost. The rest came from the hospital's emergency fund and donations raised by staff. I never asked, but I knew some of my coworkers gave up their bonuses. People I barely knew stood up when my own family sat down. The night before the surgery, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my hospital gown, staring out the window at the city lights, clutching a small drawstring bag of my belongings. My phone buzzed, a live stream link sent by a nurse on break. It was Matthew's wedding, a luxury beachfront resort in San Diego. Over 300 guests, string lights dancing in the breeze, live music from a Grammy-nominated jazz band. My brother stood at the altar laughing with his bride as the sun set behind them in golden layers. Then Evelyn took the mic. Her voice rang clear over the speakers. "We are so proud of our son Matthew. He is everything we ever dreamed of in a child. A leader, a husband, a perfect example." I felt my chest clench, not from the surgery, but something deeper, something hollow and sharp. The nurse muted the video. "Sorry," she whispered. "I didn't think it would play automatically." "No, it's okay," I said quietly. "Leave it." I watched the rest of the wedding in silence. Fireworks exploded behind the couple as they kissed. My screen filled with hashtags: #Harper wedding, coastal elegance, San Diego I do. It was trending locally. Meanwhile, I was alone in a dim hospital room, my VUR in my arm heart monitor blinking steadily beside me. Only one person came that night. Marcus, a respiratory therapist I'd worked with during overnight shifts. He brought a sandwich and sat in the corner, not saying much, just being there. Morning came quickly. Nurses moved like clockwork, prepping me for surgery. I was rolled down white corridors under harsh lights. Just before I went under, Rachel squeezed my hand. "You matter, Daniel. No matter what they see or don't see." Those were the last words I heard before the anesthesia pulled me into darkness. The surgery lasted 6 hours. I learned later that there were complications. My heart stopped twice, but Dr. Miles didn't give up. When I woke up in recovery, everything hurt. But I was alive. The hospital room was quiet. My chest was bandaged, my throat raw from the ventilator. I couldn't speak. Rachel sat beside me, reading from a paperback. When she noticed my eyes flutter open, she smiled gently. "You made it." Tears blurred my vision. I wasn't sure if it was the drugs or the release of everything I'd carried. There were no flowers from my family, no calls, no cards, but the nurses had left sticky notes on the walls. "Get well soon, Daniel. You're stronger than you know. Can't wait to see you back." Somehow that was enough, and for the first time in weeks I let myself sleep without fear of not waking up. Recovery was slow and cruel, the kind of pain that crept into your bones and made even small movements feel like battles. I couldn't lift my arms above my head for weeks. Climbing stairs felt like hiking Everest. For a long time I couldn't even laugh without clutching my chest. But every day I got up. I walked a few more steps, I stretched a little farther. I kept a notebook where I marked every small victory, first shower without assistance. First time I made it outside, first time I didn't cry from frustration. Rachel kept visiting, always with something to distract me, a crossword, a documentary recommendation, a muffin from a bakery she swore by. Sometimes we sat in silence. Other times we talked about anything but my heart. Marcus stopped by too, bringing terrible hospital coffee and dry jokes that somehow made me smile. My body was weak, but something inside me had begun rebuilding. About 6 months in, Dr. Miles told me something that shifted everything. "You've got more than just a second chance, Daniel. You've got clarity. Most people go their whole lives not knowing what they want. You've already seen what you don't want. Use that." And I did. During a follow-up visit, I saw a flyer on the wall about a health leadership scholarship at Johns Hopkins. It was for survivors of major illness entering healthcare administration. I didn't think twice. I applied, wrote my essay with the kind of honesty that came from standing on death's edge, and sent it off. 3 months later, I got the call. Full tuition, living stipend, research placement. I moved to Baltimore with one suitcase and a worn-out duffel. The first few weeks were a blur of classes, forms, and orientation events I mostly skipped. I wasn't there to make friends. I was there to rebuild. But Olivia Grant changed that. We met at a student legal aid seminar. She was tall, confident, with a voice that carried across rooms without ever being loud. I asked a question about nonprofit liability, and afterward she approached me with a smile. "You asked that like someone who's been burned before." I smiled back, more like someone who's walked through fire. Olivia became a constant. She studied law, worked nights at a legal clinic, and had a laugh that made people pause mid-conversation just to listen. We started sharing coffee breaks, then dinners, then long walks through the quiet streets of campus. She never asked about my scars until I offered them. And when I did, she didn't flinch. "You're not broken, Daniel. You're forged. That's stronger." It wasn't long before we became more than friends. She was my calm in the chaos, my mirror and my anchor, the first person who looked at me and didn't see damage, just depth. Over the next year, I finished my research on equitable hospital expansion. The topic consumed me: how to bring modern care to communities like the one I came from. Olivia helped me draft proposals, reviewed every legal clause, and challenged every weak assumption. By the time I graduated, I had offers from hospitals across the country. But I knew where I needed to go: back home. Not to my family, but to the city that raised me, overlooked me, and still needed people who understood the cracks in its system. I called Rachel first. "You serious about this?" she asked. "Only if you'll run the nursing team. You build it, Daniel, and I'm there." The plan was simple: transform Rainier Community into a modern community-first facility. Expand services, bring in mental health programs, establish legal aid clinics for patients. It was ambitious, it was expensive. But we got grants, donations. Olivia pulled in law firms for pro bono support. We launched quietly. No ribbon cutting, no press release. Just a new wing with clean walls, fresh staff, and a purpose. Still, word got out. One local paper ran a feature on me, from hospital bed to hospital builder. I cringed at the headline, but the article was honest. They got it right. Then another paper, larger, flashier, ran a piece on Matthew. Tech CEO, successful wedding, philanthropic ventures. A glossy photo of him and his wife standing on the beach, Evelyn and Gerald beside them. The article called him the pride of Boston. It didn't mention me at all. I showed it to Olivia. She read it and said nothing. Then she slid the paper across the table, placed her hand over mine and smiled. You already won, Daniel. You just did it quietly. I didn't need headlines. I didn't need a legacy carved in stone. What I needed was proof that what I went through meant something, that all that pain could bloom into something better for someone else. I spent my mornings at the construction site of the Rainier expansion, walking through halls lined with exposed wires and dusty beams, picturing the finished wards. My afternoons were filled with calls to donors, reviewing legal paperwork Olivia helped draft, and helping Rachel interview nurses who actually wanted to be there. People who cared. The first building we opened was the pediatric wing. On opening day, a little girl in a wheelchair handed me a crayon drawing of the building with a smiling sun overhead. I kept that drawing in my office. Reporters started calling once the wing went operational. They wanted the angle, the drama, the transformation. I turned them all down. No interviews, no photo ops. You sure about that? Rachel asked one afternoon. Yeah, let the work speak for itself. But the world rarely lets things stay quiet. One afternoon, a friend from Johns Hopkins texted me a photo of a newsstand. It was a glossy feature in a major magazine. The cover read, "Harper Legacy, a Family's Triumph." There was Matthew again, polished, poised, posing with Evelyn and Gerald like some dynasty heir. The article painted him as a philanthropist, a tech visionary, a loyal son. I flipped through the pages in the break room. The wedding was mentioned again. Quotes from guests about how perfect it was. A full-page spread of Evelyn raising a toast. No mention of the hospital. No mention of the surgery. Of Rachel. Of Olivia. Of me. You'd think I'd be angry, but it was something colder. A quiet understanding that truth was never the currency media traded in. They wanted clean stories, beautiful people, legacies that made sense. I was messy, complicated, a rewrite of a narrative that never included me in the first place. Later that week, a small community blog ran a piece titled "The Quiet Rebuilder." It talked about the new mental health clinic we opened, how patient wait times dropped by 40%, how the neighborhood's emergency room visits had plummeted. It ended with a line that stayed with me. Sometimes heroes don't make noise, they just open doors. I printed that article, taped it next to the crayon drawing in my office. Olivia caught me reading it one evening. Still hate press, huh? Only the kind that forgets what matters. She walked over, placed her chin on my shoulder. Then keep giving them something worth remembering. That night I walked through the new lobby under soft yellow lights. Nurses laughed quietly at the front desk. A patient played guitar near the window. The smell of fresh paint still lingered. And for the first time since waking up on that hospital bed, I felt something new. Peace. Peace didn't last long. It started with a letter, one of those thick envelopes that screamed trouble even before you opened it. I was in my office reviewing payroll approvals when it landed on my desk. The return address was some debt collection agency I'd never heard of. I opened it, skimmed the first paragraph, and felt my stomach drop. They were demanding repayment on a student loan I had no memory of. Taken out in my name, a total of $43,000. The paperwork showed I'd applied for it in 2011, but in 2011 I was barely keeping up with part-time classes and working double shifts at the hospital. I didn't borrow that money. I showed the letter to Olivia that night. Her face changed as she read through the pages. "This isn't your signature," she said, pointing at the loan application. "It's not even close. It's not even..." She set the letter down and leaned back silent for a long moment. "We need to pull your credit report, check everything. This might be bigger." She was right. Over the next 2 weeks, Olivia dug into everything with the precision of someone who didn't leave room for doubt. What she found made my chest ache worse than any scalpel ever had. There were 3 separate lines of credit opened under my name, all dating back over a decade, all signed with forged signatures and all tied in some way to Matthew's time at MIT. But the real knife came when Olivia uncovered the original co-signers for one of the loans. Gerald and Evelyn Harper. My parents had signed me into tens of thousands of dollars in debt, without telling me, without asking. I sat with that truth for days before confronting them. I wanted to scream, break something. But instead I asked them to meet me at a quiet diner near their home. No audience, no distractions. They arrived 10 minutes late. Evelyn hugged me like nothing was wrong. Gerald shook my hand, like we were colleagues. "What's this about?" Gerald asked, glancing at the manila folder in my hands. I slid the documents across the table. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. Evelyn leaned over to look. I waited. Finally, Gerald closed the folder. So I repeated. "You forged my name. You took out loans in my name. You buried me in debt so Matthew could finish school." "It was necessary at the time," Evelyn said softly. "You were barely using your credit. Matthew had potential." My mouth fell open. Potential. "You don't understand," she continued. "He was on the verge of something big. We thought we'd pay it off before you ever noticed. You didn't. You didn't pay it off, and you never told me." Her eyes welled with tears. "We made a mistake." "No," I said. "You made a decision, a conscious choice to sacrifice one child for the comfort of another." "Don't be dramatic," Gerald snapped. "Families do things like this all the time. It's how we support each other." "No," I said quietly. "That's not support, that's theft. You stole from me." "You think we haven't sacrificed," he said, raising his voice. "We gave everything to keep this family afloat, and I gave up my health, my trust, my future." "For what?" The diner had gone quiet. A waitress hovered nearby but didn't approach. I stood slowly placing a $100 bill on the table. "I'm not here for an apology. I'm here so you can see the damage, so you know I know." Gerald said nothing. Evelyn reached out, but I stepped back. "This conversation is over." And I walked out into the cold evening, the folder still in my hands, but the weight of it somehow lighter. I didn't look back when I left the diner. I didn't need to. The silence from that table would echo long enough. The following weeks passed in a strange kind of quiet. I buried myself in work, focused on expanding our mental health services. Olivia could sense I was shutting down. But she didn't push. She gave me space but stayed close. I thought the worst of it was over. Then the storm hit. It started with a video. I didn't go looking for it. It found me through a link sent by Marcus with a single text, "You're going to want to see this." The video showed Matthew drunk and loud at what looked like a bachelor party in Miami. The camera zoomed in as he kissed someone who was definitely not his wife. The girl turned to face the camera. She was young, maybe college-aged. Someone shouted his name off screen. Matthew didn't care. It went viral overnight. The Harper golden boy, tech visionary, husband of the year, caught cheating in a room full of expensive liquor and bad decisions. News outlets ran the story like wildfire. Social media dissected every frame. Reddit threads speculated on the girl's identity, on how long the affair had been going on, whether Evelyn and Gerald knew. But the real blow came 2 days later. Matthew's wife's family, wealthy investors from the East Coast, pulled out of their joint venture with his company. Overnight, the stock tanked. Contracts were canceled. Lawsuits emerged from the woodwork. Within a week, the company filed for bankruptcy protection. Matthew went from boardrooms to silence. He disappeared offline. No statements, no apologies. Then came the news about my parents. Apparently, in the years following Matthew's rise, Gerald and Evelyn had taken out a second mortgage on their home to invest in one of Matthew's startups. That company was now worthless. Their house collateral. They were evicted quietly, no headlines, but it didn't stay quiet for long. A local reporter caught wind. The story ran under a brutal headline: Harper family legacy crumbles. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. But I felt something shift. For years they built a narrative that Matthew was the crown jewel, that I was the afterthought. But the truth had a way of cracking through polished marble. One afternoon, Olivia came into my office with a tablet in hand. "They're trending again," she said. "Harper fallout. Your name's not mentioned." "Good." She sat across from me. "You're not tempted to go public, set the record straight." I shook my head. "The truth doesn't need my permission to exist." She nodded slowly. "But it could use your voice." "Maybe one day," I said, "but not today." We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the hospital's new therapy garden was blooming. Volunteers were planting herbs. Children laughed in the background. Everything was breaking apart for them. And somehow I'd never felt more whole. The construction site buzzed with noise, gravel crunching drills, whining radios humming old rock songs. I was reviewing blueprints on the second floor of the admin wing when one of the volunteers said someone was looking for me out front. I came down expecting a donor or maybe Olivia, but instead I saw Gerald standing just inside the gate. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but like someone had turned the saturation down on him. His suit was wrinkled, the collar of his shirt limp, and beside him Evelyn stood, stiff arms clutched around her handbag. He spotted me and raised a hand like we were casual acquaintances, like this was normal. "Daniel," he said as I approached. "We need to talk." I didn't answer, just nodded once, motioning them through the security barrier and into the site office. The inside of the temporary office was clean, quiet, air-conditioned. I offered them water. They declined. Gerald stood while Evelyn sat delicately on the edge of the visitor chair. Her eyes avoided mine, so he began clearing his throat. "Things have shifted for us. We're in a difficult position." I leaned against the desk, arms crossed. He continued, "We lost the house, and with Matthew's company, well, we're basically cut off. We could use some help getting back on our feet." I waited, let the silence stretch until even the humming HVAC unit felt loud. "You want money?" I said flatly. Gerald flinched slightly. "Support. Family supports each other." Evelyn finally looked at me. Her eyes were glassy. "We're not asking for handouts, just a little assistance." A bridge, I repeated. "Like the one you burned years ago when you took out loans in my name. When you left me to die, that's not fair." Gerald snapped. "That's not what this is about. It's exactly what this is about. You chose him, every time, even when I needed a surgery to stay alive, even when you could have come clean about the loans." Gerald ran a hand down his face. "That wedding was already planned. Deposits made. It would have cost more to cancel. And my heart surgery. That wasn't worth disrupting your seating chart." Evelyn flinched. "That's not what we meant." I stepped closer. "Tell me then. What exactly do you mean?" She looked down. I sighed, walked to the window. Outside, the steel frame of the new wing caught the sun, casting long shadows. "You know where you are right now?" Gerald frowned. "A construction site. A hospital. My hospital. Built from nothing. No loans, no family inheritance, just sweat debt I did consent to and people who didn't lie to my face. Gerald shifted uncomfortable. We're still your parents. That word doesn't mean what you think it does. I opened a drawer, pulled out a small stack of brochures. There's a transitional housing nonprofit on 5th and Main. They take in seniors, no ID required, just show up. Tell them I sent you. Gerald stared at the brochures. You're serious, dead serious. Evelyn finally stood. Her voice was barely above a whisper. We didn't come for this. No, you came for a shortcut, but those days are over. I opened the door. They left without another word. As they disappeared past the gates, Rachel walked up beside me. She'd been in the hallway. She didn't ask anything, just handed me a clipboard, ready for rounds. Yeah, I said, let's go. We moved through the site like nothing had happened, checking in on departments, reviewing schedules, and making notes on supply delays. But something had changed in me. I could feel it in the way I stood straighter, breathed easier. Later that evening, Olivia met me in my office. She had a small folder under one arm and a look I recognized, determined, cautious. She sat down without preamble. I've compiled everything. The forged loans, the signature analysis, the recordings from your conversations. We have enough to file a complaint or even press charges if that's what you want. I didn't answer right away. I opened the folder, flipped through the papers. There it was, my name sloppily written on loan forms side by side with Evelyn's careful penmanship. On one page, an audio transcript where Evelyn said, "He wasn't even using his credit and we thought we'd pay it off before he noticed." A slow, quiet fury built in my chest. "You've done good work," I said finally, "but I'm not sure I want to take this to court. Not because they don't deserve it, but because it's not about punishment anymore." Olivia tilted her head. "So what is it about closure?" I closed the folder and placed it in my desk drawer. For the first time in my life, I wasn't stuck reacting to their decisions. I had a choice. I wasn't the desperate kid begging for help or the broken man clawing for air after heart surgery. I was standing on my own ground, in my own hospital. A few days later, Gerald called. I didn't answer. He left a message. Just breathing and then quietly, "I'm sorry, son." I didn't delete it. But I didn't return the call either. Instead, I met Olivia for coffee in the garden behind the hospital. She brought her dog and we watched him try to eat a bee. She glanced at me. "You okay?" I nodded. "I feel like I've been underwater for years and someone just pulled me up." She smiled soft and knowing. "You pulled yourself up." That night I walked through the new wing alone. Lights were still being installed. Some rooms were just bare drywall and dreams. But I saw the future there. Not a future given to me by others, but one I had built. I paused at the center of the atrium. Above me the skylight showed the stars, and for once I didn't wonder what they owed me. I knew I didn't owe them anything. The air felt still that night, like the hospital itself was holding its breath. I stood under the skylight a moment longer, then walked out of the atrium and into the quiet hallway, footsteps echoing against unfinished tile. In my office the next morning, Olivia dropped a manila envelope on my desk. Inside were printed copies of every legal document, every email confirming the forged credit lines, and a full transcription of Evelyn's taped remarks. She had written a note on top. "Whatever you choose, it's yours now." That phrase echoed in my head. It's yours now. The idea of choice had never really existed for me growing up. Things were always decided: what I wore, where I stood, what I was worth. But now I finally had agency. That afternoon I sat alone and reviewed everything again. Not out of uncertainty, but from a need to acknowledge how far I had come. I wasn't going to press charges. I wasn't going to expose them to the press. My silence wasn't forgiveness, it was power. They didn't deserve the dignity of being part of my next chapter. Later that week, I gave Olivia the final answer. We'll keep the records secure, I told her, just in case, but let's not act on it unless we absolutely have to. She nodded. You're sure? I'm sure. We were sitting on the back steps of the admin building, coffee cups balanced on the concrete beside us. She glanced up at me, her eyes scanning. You look taller, she said. I smiled. Just lighter. The hospital was gaining traction. Media outlets were starting to call again. I ignored them. Instead, I focused on the work. I doubled down on our expansion plans, applied for federal grants, and hired a full-time outreach director. Rachel introduced a new mentorship program for underprivileged high school students. Every time I passed the classroom where they gathered laughing over anatomy flashcards, I felt something unfamiliar. Pride. Not the kind I'd seen in Evelyn's rehearsed speeches, but real earned pride. One morning, a man I didn't recognize showed up at the front desk. He was middle-aged, slight, with nervous energy. Said he used to serve with my grandfather in Korea. Had driven up from Philadelphia after hearing about the hospital. He handed me a photo, black and white edges worn, of my grandfather in uniform, standing with 3 other men, one of them him. He said he used to talk about family a lot. Said he hoped one day someone in his line would do something lasting. I didn't know what to say, so I thanked him, made sure he got lunch in the cafeteria, and slipped the photo into my desk drawer. That evening, I told Olivia. She leaned back in her chair and said, Maybe he saw this future before you did. I wondered if that was true. If somehow, despite everything, someone in my family once believed in something better. That night, Gerald and Evelyn left another voicemail. This time, Evelyn's voice cracked as she asked if I would meet them one last time. I didn't reply, but I did listen. I walked through the nearly finished pediatric wing. The paint was up, the decals in place. Whales and stars floated across the walls. I paused at the nurse's station and imagined the laughter of children filling the hallways. And for the first time, I realized what I had built wasn't revenge. It wasn't restitution. It was legacy, mine. I spent the next few weeks in reflection, walking the halls of the hospital more slowly, taking the long way to meetings, stopping to speak with patients and staff. The legacy I had built wasn't loud or shiny, but it was meaningful. It was mine, and it had room to grow. One morning, I stood in the main atrium where a new bronze plaque had just been mounted. It read, "The Miles and Rachel Fund, in honor of the 2 people who stood by me when I had nothing left but breath and the will to keep going." The scholarship would support medical students from disadvantaged backgrounds. It felt right. Later that day, I gave a short speech to the staff. I told them about second chances, about what it meant to be truly seen, not for your pedigree or last name, but for your persistence. Some people cried, some clapped. I kept it short. I didn't mention my parents or Matthew, or the calls they still left unanswered on my phone. Some chapters didn't need revisiting. That evening, Olivia and I walked the river trail behind the hospital. The sun dipped low, coloring the sky in peach and gold. She laced her fingers with mine. "Do you regret anything?" she asked. I thought about it, about the pain, the betrayal, the quiet ache that still flared some nights when I saw old family photos or birthdays passed without a call. "No," I said, "not anymore. Because if any of it hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here, I wouldn't be me." We sat on the bench near the willow tree. Wind stirred the branches, brushing our shoulders like a whisper. "I used to think forgiveness was for them, but it isn't. It's for you, so you don't carry their weight any longer." She smiled, leaned her head against my shoulder. We stayed like that, the city humming quietly behind us, the hospital glowing ahead. As I looked out at the lights of the community I'd helped nurture, I understood something I hadn't before. Family isn't just blood. Family is who shows up, who fights for you, who chooses you over and over. And sometimes choosing love means choosing yourself. So tell me this. If you were in my shoes, would you forgive them? Would you choose blood or justice?